Dear friends, welcome to the next edition of the Forum 2000 online talk, which is a new series of online interviews with important and relevant people from the Forum 2000 network. We are focusing on the future of freedom and democracy during these uncomplicated times in the era of global pandemic.
I'm good to be on Forum 2000 online show and good to see you, Jakub. Through online, yes, with social distancing, we have to maintain distance now, and glad to see you doing well.
I'm glad that you are well as well. As our viewers can see, we have the pleasure today of speaking with Dr. Lobsang Sangay, the president of the Central Tibet Administration, which is in fact the Tibetan government in exile in India. So welcome, Dr. Sangay.
Thank you.
This year we are marking the 70th anniversary of the Chinese annexation of Tibet. At the beginning of the year, Freedom House has published its latest Freedom in the World report, where Tibet comes as the second least free place in the world after Syria. So we know that situation in Tibet is difficult even in normal times. Today, in the global pandemic, Tibet, as all the other places in the world, is also affected. So that will be one of the issues that we will discuss today. We will also look at some other wider issues focusing on the changing international order and on the global dynamics connected with the pandemic. But first, please let me ask you, Dr. Sangay, how are you doing personally? How are you spending the pandemic time?
Well, the social distancing at its height, so I go to office for a few hours a day or whenever I'm needed. But I think most of our staff members stay home and work from home. And then as far as myself, I have to be updated with the situation inside Tibet and Tibetans around the world. Now Tibetans are in 40 countries. So I get updates through officers of Tibet from around the world, settlement officers and our hospital directors in Tibetans in India, Nepal and Bhutan. So I keep myself updated, and then do the best we can to how to console them and how to help them emotionally, psychologically and materially. So this is what keeps me busy every day.
So can you describe how the situation inside Tibet is looking at the moment?
Inside Tibet, it's very difficult to say. As you mentioned, Freedom House came out with a report which listed Tibet as the second least free region for 5 years in a row after Syria. So, second least free region for 5 years in a row after Syria. So in that index, Freedom Index, one of the measurement is freedom of speech and transparency and rule of law. All these things are below 0 in Tibet. Hence, you don't know what's going on inside Tibet. Now, there are two sources, and this is, informally collected through various news forum, which also is very difficult to assess, that 866 people in whole of Tibetan plateau have been affected, out of which 106 is estimated to be Tibetans. Now, why it's difficult to believe is 106 Tibetans were infected and all of them got cured. So not even a single Tibetan died. So this is very difficult to believe. So there has been some, death, but most of them are supposed to be Chinese. So, this is what we have. But we know situation in Tibet is very severe, politically, environmentally, culturally, generally is very severe. And after this Wuhan originated coronavirus pandemic, a situation in Tibet is very serious and very severe.
Can you also explain a little bit how the Tibetan communities around the world are coping, and what are the current priorities of your administration of the CTA?
Yeah, Tibetans are scattered in 40 countries now. Like the global pandemic, most severe situation in Italy and Spain, but there are very few Tibetans in Spain and some in Italy. And then there's a large number of Tibetans in America, especially in New York. So altogether, we estimate around 100 Tibetans have been infected. And so far, we know that there have been cases of 4 deaths, and all of them were above the age of 70. So other than the those who are infected, the younger ones are mostly doing well so far. In the Tibetan settlements in India and Nepal, so far, we don't have a single case of coronavirus which originated in Wuhan. So far, especially in India, we know for sure. So India as a whole is doing well so far, and hopefully it will continue this way.
You mentioned it. The virus originated in China, in Wuhan. As it seems, China has been able to overcome the crisis for the time being, and has been in a way exploiting the pandemic globally by selling aid to different countries around the world, or even sending it for free, exercising its diplomatic muscle a little bit more than normally. How do you assess the handling by China of this crisis?
I think China, is trying to change the narrative now, because obviously the coronavirus, which originated in Wuhan, that there is no dispute. Now, whether it was deliberately leaked from the bio lab in Wuhan, or it was accident, or it originated in the wet market of Wuhan, it's being debated by scientists. But the fact that the coronavirus originated in Wuhan is not disputed. But the problem is, when it first originated, now it's a well-known fact. They try to hide it. Even the whistleblowers and the doctors and the nurses who complained about it, who lodged complaints, and there was silence. And the famous case of the doctor who was a whistleblower later died of infection. So typically the Chinese government tried to do the best, the way they do it, like, as they did in Tibet and as they continue to do in Tibet and everywhere, which is to suppress information, don't let others know. And the whole world, especially China, lost that crucial 3 weeks' time, which now many experts have said, had the Chinese government intervened early, 95% of the coronavirus pandemic in the whole world, including in China, could have been prevented. Hence, the blame lies squarely with the Chinese government, especially for lack of freedom of speech and transparency, and lack of independent media. So because of which, now there's a global pandemic, and now they're trying to change the narrative, because China is also continued to be the manufacturing hub. So whatever you want, the face masks or the all the PPE essentials, things that you need to prevent any kind of infection, you need these things, and China is manufacturing it, and then exporting it and selling it. In some few cases, they're giving it for free. And then in few cases, in some cases, they say it's a poor quality and not trustworthy also. But they're trying to change the narrative. But we must all know they cannot change the narrative. We should not let them change the narrative. And the blame squarely should lie with the Chinese government, for suppressing the information at the initial stage. Now, whole world is suffering because of that.
Do you think that this mishandling of the epidemics in the beginning in China will change the situation internally, or will the other issues connected with the pandemic somehow affect the internal stability of the Chinese regime?
Definitely. First, they suppressed information locally. Then the most crucial information is whether this will have a human-to-human transmission or not. Till middle of January, both the Chinese media and supported by WHO, created uncertainty as though there's going to be human-to-human transmission. In fact, more than 10,000 people were already infected in China, and there was human-to-human transmission, but they were denying that fact. So this is one issue. And secondly, when I think it was getting out of control in China, I think the Chinese leadership assured the global leaders, whoever had telephone calls, whatever conversation they had, that they are going to keep it under control and, prevent it from spreading around the world. So that was the assurance I think the Chinese leaders gave the rest of the world, and the Europe and America and the whole world, now 185 countries, right, where there's infection, kind of believed the words of the Chinese leaders and their assurance. And later it exploded in Italy and Spain and whole of Europe, and now in America and around the world. So clearly, assurance at the leadership level and the crucial information like that, whether it's human-to-human transmission, whether it can be contained only in China or not, all these information were in some ways not trustworthy. So hence clearly now, the trust deficit of China is concerned is lagging now.
So you believe that this trust deficit and the fact that China, if not caused, then greatly contributed to the global spread of this virus, that this will lead to a global, let's say, weakening of the position of China, or will it somehow, will still China be somehow able to use it in its favor?
I mean, we don't have a purview to all the cables, of information exchange between Chinese leaders and leaders around the world. But even at now, from the US government and some of the European countries have clearly come out, in some ways hinted or indicated that the information provided to them by the Chinese leaders were not trustworthy. So this is at the highest level, So those kinds of misinformation contributed to this global pandemic, hence the case of trust deficit. I'm sure before, many people kind of thought that the Chinese media and the information and the Chinese system, because it's a communist authoritarian system, cannot be trusted. Now, even at the leadership level, the words and the information the leaders shared at the highest level to their counterpart in the rest of the world could not be trusted. Hence the trust deficit, because now this has led many countries, unprepared to deal with this pandemic. Now everybody is scrambling to, deal with it, and then everybody in all the countries are facing major challenges now.
It is pretty clear that the world will be different after we somehow manage to deal with the pandemic, or at least get it under control.
I've been in my position for 9 years. The first 3 or 4 years, wherever I went, people thought China is the new thing. You must deal with China. You must have relationship with China. Yes, Tibet situation is bad, but it's an exception. But Chinese government as a whole and Chinese system we can deal with, we can trust them. That was the mindset. But in the last 4 or 5 years, the trust deficit was again, raised for various other reasons. Now with this coronavirus, which originated in Wuhan, I think it has exploded. So the whole world now economically will be severely affected, right? Emotionally, psychologically will be severely affected. And obviously from security point of view also is severely challenged, technologically challenged, and most importantly, politically it will be affected. So I think, there has to be a bit of a global readjustment in all these aspects. Now, we've been saying, actually when I participated in Forum 2000, I've been saying that the Chinese government's penetration and influences in various international organizations, including the United Nations and other, you call World Economic Forum, or you just name any major international organization, the Chinese government's penetration with their own personnel, with their own appointment, with their own people inside, it's changing the whole thing. I mean, United Nations, Human Rights Council, as we know, is being compromised, right? China has a major say in all this institution now. Now everybody is realizing the WHO in some ways is compromised. At least they pander to the Chinese government and leaders' wishes, and they try to fudge the information that comes from China to the Chinese government liking, and that has also contributed. So now all these issues are raised, China in particular, and the function of global organizations, which should be very objective. Coronavirus is a major health issue. If anything, the scientists and the doctors and the experts should be objective on this fact. But clearly, the leadership in the World Health Organization is also questioned because they were not that critical of the Chinese government. Hence the global pandemic now. So we all are paying the price for it. So all this needs to be reviewed. All this needs to be studied, and every country has to review their relationship with China and how the global organizations are functioning or are being influenced by the Chinese government.
This realignment or readjustment in the world and in the international relations will, as you hinted, will probably mean some reshape of the global liberal order. There will also be a significant pressure on Western democracies or on democracies worldwide, because the narrative sometimes is these days that the authoritarian systems can be in fact quicker or maybe more effective in dealing with such a crisis as this global pandemic. We see that it is often not the case on the cases of Russia, Turkey, etc. But that's another point. But how do you think this narrative of democracy may be being less effective or less quick? How this should be countered? What should be the priorities of the international democratic community in order to deal with these consequences of the pandemic?
I think we are in the middle of the pandemic. So some quote-unquote experts are concluding that the authoritarian system might be better in controlling this kind of pandemic, and they give the example of China. But then if you look at some other non-democratic countries like Iran and others also facing major issues, and they're not reporting as much as we would like to know. Now even Russia is facing a challenge. So at the end of this pandemic, we will come to the conclusion that democratic system, the transparent system, where there is freedom of speech and free media are better in dealing with this, provided they are given correct and timely information. At the moment, the Europe and America were caught off guard because they were not given accurate and timely information as far as coronavirus, which originated in Wuhan, is concerned. Now, this is not the first time this question has come up. I think the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, he has written an article, and it's a major chapter in a book also called Famine, where he compared the famine in India and famine in China, where he concluded, based on empirical data, there were in fact more grain in the storerooms of China than India. But because there is free media in India, media started writing about the famine that's taking place in various parts of India, and then the government and the politicians and leaders and bureaucrats did what they could in sharing the crops and the grain from the storeroom, and had lesser number of deaths in India than in China. In fact, China had more grain, but the local government, to the regional, to the national level, they all were reporting that they have more grain and there's no problem at the local level. More people have died. So the fact that democracy system dealt with in preventing or lessening famine in India than in China, it was already established. Now, we went through the case of SARS also, which affected Hong Kong severely and rest of the world less so. But at that time also, because of suppression of information and because of same Chinese government lack of transparency, again made the situation worse. So at the end of the day, we will come to the conclusion that the democracy system handled it better than the authoritarian system.
Thank you very much, President Sangay. I thank you for this interesting interview. Wish you all the best to you, your family, and the Tibetan people. And I hope to welcome you in Prague, in person, physically, as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Jakub. And I want to wish the Forum 2000 and your leadership and all the staff members very well. And looking forward to visiting Prague in the fall. And hopefully by then the pandemic would have subsided, if not disappeared, and we will have a very dynamic and very vibrant discussion at Forum 2000 this year again. Thank you very much.
Thank you and all the best.